is going into a little bit in your background to state, publicly who you are, where you're coming from, how you've shaped your visions, what were your influencers, and what are you looking at now, what are you working on, and then there will be
Is
a
this already
full.
recorded?
Yeah, it's a voice is being recorded now. Yeah.
Okay.
So the video is not yet. And then there will be 4 recordings in total so that we can trace the progress and have our people coordinate between one another by looking at these videos divided by different themes and energies so that we can just send them these updates and to look at the chronology and transparent development of these projects. The people I'm
Mhm.
interviewing are all from very ambitious spaces of building something powerful for humanity. And also, the last question I usually ask at these interviews is we're 10 years ahead in 2034, what you've been able to accomplish and what you're proud of. So that will be the indicator of the end of the interview. And this is like the repeating question I have between all of the interview people who I interview.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, you sure you can do the video? Again, I don't want to pressure you, but it would be nice to
Yeah,
see.
not today. I can't do it today.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so let's just start. Again, there will be around maybe 10 questions, maybe less. So keep that in mind. I don't have questions in mind myself, but I usually am guided, intuitively of what needs to come through. But you can also, channel. You speak a lot, by yourself without being prompted, which I also value a lot. I want you not to stop, until you feel like you're done. But I will kind of like guide the conversation a little bit more than I usually do in our calls. Is that okay?
And you're gonna put this on YouTube, on your
Yeah,
channel?
and this will be going a decentralized way on 2 channels. Yes, the 144 one and Decentralized Humanity.
Okay. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, okay. So let's start. Link, introduce yourself, how you usually introduce yourself when you are in a room of people that you don't know or that don't know you, how you usually position yourself in the networking events or generally when you meet for dinner. And I can also share the way that I met you for the first time.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been in nature. I've been talking to squirrels and deers and mountain lions, so I don't introduce myself to those animals.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, let me start then. From my perspective, the way I met you, you are community igniter. You're an organizer of very powerful networks, and I met you through the Network State event when you were organizing the only after event that was really happening in an organized way. And I supported you in bringing in the right people inside of that event. Location was amazing. It was really beautiful. I got to connect with you and other individuals that I was looking forward to connect during the conference but didn't have the time and energy, and you provided the space for a deeper connection, which is invaluable. So that's how I met you, and then we had calls that are very, very unique and quite long, where I got to know and got to experience your visions on building the network. And honestly speaking, this is one of the most exciting projects that is currently being worked on. Whether it is going to be something of a physical, product, or a product that is a community or the network itself, or the combination of the two, I see its potential as one of the most exciting ones to keep supporting and keep being part of. So it's quite authentic from my end that I really wanted you to have the space given at this podcast, making sure that we record this transparently, whatever that stage is that you're building. And I know you've been working on this project for over 5 or even 7 years. So I'd like to see a little bit of a background. Where are you coming from? We share a background of migrating to the US and living the life, in your case, Silicon Valley. For me, it was New York mostly. So I'd like to hear your experience living there and what you're observing as you're
The
part of
Hunger
it.
Games,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I survived.
Good one.
Which there were multiple ones, There's like first they pick you randomly, and then all the victors they have to compete again,
Right. Mm. So you studied in the US, correct? What did you study?
Yeah, I did. It was called a small college of big dreams. It's kind of ironic.
Really?
Yeah, it's in New York in Brooklyn Heights.
Oh yeah. And was it
I was meant
what
to
was the
go
specialty?
first to school in Louisiana, but they kind of like they were not really honest about some things, and then it didn't work out.
Okay.
I had already applied for the visa, I think, and then basically I did the work on my own, just looking for schools. I mean, I just wanted to like go to America, and yeah, I found this one school which is called, you know, Small College of Big Dreams, and it was in New York City. So then I applied, I got a scholarship, and yeah, I went there. What did I study? I studied economics, philosophy, like governance, like history, computer science. I taught myself. Although these days I'm not really anything because you know. Anyway, yeah. Yeah, that's what I studied.
What education gave you versus the education of life?
A large bill in the United States, very expensive. I guess I didn't see any other way to go there. You know, it's it's like very difficult to immigrate to the United States legally. These days, you know, illegal immigration is much easier. You get hotel, lodging, and free food. You know, it's much different.
Right.
But like, you come here. I mean, I was like, you go to the airport, and it's just a different country than Europe. So, you know, back then there was maybe still a rule of law. Yeah, and like, you know, as you know, I had never been to the US. I don't have family there. I don't know how else you can go there. Like, I mean, it's very difficult. I mean, as other people will tell you, immigration is very hard.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And why did you decide to stay after your college years? What did you do?
Well, I did two degrees simultaneously. So I also studied at LSE in London.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I did like 2 bachelor degrees simultaneously, basically.
Impressive.
Yeah, so I mean, what did I do? I basically met my professor in London, whom I then worked for after college. And, you know, his company, his startup was based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Yeah, which was like an amazing opportunity.
What was the company doing? His finance company?
Yeah, Professor Neil Ferguson. Now he's called Sir Neil Ferguson.
Nice.
He's very, very smart, very intelligent. One of the best historians, I would think, of his generation, or even like alive. Yeah, and he's very well connected, and you know, he also understands financial markets, and you know, I was interested in understanding markets, global markets, and investing, and so then sort of like I already worked for him when I was a student at LSE. I did some research, and it was a great way to accelerate my career, I guess, at the time.
Right. And how long did you work there? Was it like a full-time thing for you?
Yeah, it was for a year. It was a full-time thing. My visa was for 1 year, and then my visa expired again.
And then you found a new job.
Well, then I got into Harvard, so then I got a student visa.
I see.
And I studied there. Yeah.
What did you study in Harvard?
Well, I had like I was, you know, under Neil Ferguson, studying under him in FAS, which is like the oldest graduate school at Harvard.
Yeah.
I had a lot of autonomy. I mean, I did take classes at different schools. Yeah, at the law school, at the governance school, what is it called, Kennedy School, and then business school, HBS. And like, yeah, I did just like create my own program, and I met people. I wrote for the different newspapers. I started like a nonprofit called the Future Society. So I was just like basically networking there and like meeting all these world leaders.
Nice.
And just making my most time. Most time out of like, that's how I also met like Danielle Strachman of the Thiel Foundation. And then that's how I moved to like California. So yeah, it's quite a magical place. I mean, you know, these days maybe education has changed a bit, but it's, I guess like a lot of like local power,
Absolutely. Yes.
like I think that's what I'm looking for. Like these days, everybody looking at screens.
Local power is the way. I get it.
It's like, you go there and there's so many smart people and like great environment and a lot of different events, and yeah, everybody's like ambitious and it's going somewhere. So I think that's like generally, why people go to university or why people want to go to these, great universities. It's the connections,
Access to this.
like unless we can already live in a dream world, like it's like it can't just be looking at the screen. Like it's kind of like yeah, I mean, it has a lot of advantages, but I think like it would be great if we have like an environment that's more locally driven as well. Yeah, but that's a different issue, a different topic, I guess. Yeah.
What was your nonprofit focused on? What kind of activities?
Well, I helped to start it. It was basically sort of at the intersection of AI and governance. Wow. And the idea was like, okay, how can you be responsible with artificial intelligence? Which was like now looking back, it was very ahead of its time in a way, which is kind of like, maybe I didn't even realize. I was invited to like the St. Gallen Symposium in Switzerland, where I wrote like an essay, which I guess it was like an essay competition, and based on, on what essays they selected, you would go to Switzerland. I wrote one on artificial inquisition. So I guess not to like, it sounds like negative, but it was just about sort of like, to like warn about the impact and that we need to be careful, and the governance aspect of it is important, as we've seen now, with supposedly open AI, which is not open and which is like, trumping on principles. I think like, so, I mean, they're working with the World Economic Forum, and, I'm not really involved anymore, but it was like a nonprofit. So they invite different people and, had some research contracts. Yeah.
Interesting. No, look, I didn't know that part of you. So what was that writing about? What is that AI Inquisition? And what was the angle?
I can send you the paper if you want. I mean, it's just like an essay. I mean, I wrote this as a student. I don't think it has any like too deep thoughts. I just basically, I guess my main point was just like, this is going to be very powerful, impactful to society. So I think it's important to have strong governance, not in terms of regulation, not in terms of like, you need to like regulate it necessarily, like, but like in terms of like thinking deeply about the implications of, well, how is it going to reshape the world? And, how can we, I mean, if you fly anywhere, like there's certain regulations that are good, there's certain like, I mean, yeah, so we want strong governance. It's just like we have a lot of incompetent, sort of like unnecessary governance. And so I think the idea was just like, okay, how can you, just generally, sort of have some like guidelines and principles that you sort of like,
and what were your proposed guidelines and principles in that research, or now? What do you think is important in governing AI?
Well, ideally it would be great if it was like the internet, I mean, the internet wasn't built by a single company. Like that's why it became so huge, and surely it's lost its decentralized character a little bit, but it's still like pretty decentralized compared to other things, and so I think like with AI would be the same. I think it's like, how can people use it as a tool, and they know they have access to it, and it can't be like revoked by like another company. And then with something like this is potentially, I mean, there's other, there's AI people, experts and people who know more than me, but I think like, this becomes very powerful stuff. So how can we, it's a question of trust, we need to like, how can we trust like a single company, or a single set of people, as we've seen now with so-called open AI. It's not open. So people lie, people don't, I mean, companies just like look at their own bottom line. They don't think about societal implications in the world at large. I mean, they say they do, and to some extent they do. It's not like companies are bad or corporations are bad, but they're just incentivized, to maximize profit for shareholders. And with something like this, obviously, is very, very valuable, as we see with NVIDIA, I mean, very valuable company. Yeah.
What is value to you, Link? What is value?
What is value to me? In what way?
What do you consider as valuable for yourself?
For what?
Life, good life, creating good life for yourself, creating happiness, day to day. What do you value?
Well, I think it's important to be alive, and to sort of have some purpose, some meaning in your life.
What's your
be able,
purpose?
like Elon always says, be useful. I think that's good.
Be useful, yes.
How you can create value for other people, but yeah, how can you find your talent and exercise your talent?
Yeah.
I think it's a very personal question. But yeah, being alive, being like living the dream, not necessarily and like living all your wishes and everything's like a dream, but living like realizing, not being like, I guess it has to do with freedom. America is supposed to be about freedom, so it's like, how can you exercise your freedom and then pursue something that like is sort of in alignment with your heart and also adds value to the world.
Yeah. Do you?
But I think it's like, change yourself first. I guess, I'm just talking now, but
No, but you're right. Change yourself first. That's true. We'll look again. From what I'm seeing, America, right, being that freedom-loving space. Do you feel free in America? And if so, then where the freedom really comes from? How can individual be free? Because I'm gonna try to like answer that direction. What I'm seeing is that individualism is very high in America compared to in Europe or in Russia, where I'm coming from, where the collectivism is still more important than individual happiness of one. Do you think that feeling of individual, that value in individualism, had brought America to the position that is ahead of the world, or it kind of stopped it from developing into something more, I guess, advanced?
Well, I think generally the Western world is very individualistic compared to Asian world.
Well, that is.
And it has advantages and disadvantages. I guess in terms of freedom, America has some freedom. In some ways, it's the illusion of freedom. There's different types of freedom. There's freedom, economic freedom. I mean, America used to be the place where people go when you were, chased for your religious beliefs or something else. And it was kind of like a place away from the world. But now, we need to have a revolution in America, so it can be that place again, because the reality is like not that, to some extent.
Yes, and with technologies coming from America specifically, those that we are using daily, including the internet technologies, including the hardware, it's coming from a place of more of a surveillance and, almost like reducing the freedom. For example, this channel that I'm posting this on is shadow banned already. And, it's very difficult to build an audience.
Like your channel is shadow banned on YouTube?
Already, yes.
How do you know that?
Well, I don't get any views at all, only by sending the direct link to the videos, I get substantial amount of views, and generally it's not like this content is being recommended, let's say, by this engine. So then the question is,
part of it is also social media and this constant battle for attention, and like a lot of people put a lot of resources in like creating high quality content, and then it's difficult to compete with that.
Yes, high quality content versus the content that is actually needed to come out to better coordinate individuals is something that I'm focusing on, is the coordination aspect and transparent communications. And that's the quality that I'm, let's say, supporting. Well, let's dive into the vision of technology that you have. Okay, AI. Okay, Dream Network. Let's see.
Dream Network.
What is it that you are envisioning in the past 7 years? How is that connected with the decentralized world? Maybe with your background in the decentralized world and the Web3 world. and how you're envisioning now with the AI and Web3, with the current technologies, how do you envision your network to be different?
Different from what exactly?
Ethereum's of the world, let's say.
Well, I'm not really building a blockchain. So, what Ethereum is doing is building, supposedly like the world computer. Yeah, I mean, I'm doing something very different. I suppose like generally it's a different type of frontier, which is a frontier of the mind, which is like has to do with exploring like internal processes and your own psychology, but it extends beyond psychology into the physical world also, as with things with lucid dreaming. Yeah, so I guess the goal is I guess it relates to freedom, the idea of like, how can you have freedom from the mind, which is, I think, a very important type of freedom. How can you have more mental mobility, which I think is very important given how, like, in the physical world we traverse with like automobiles or cars the same, planes, nobody really walks, much. I mean, there's, going for a walk, but people generally, like the whole economy, runs on automobiles and, planes and, if you think about all the different goods that are being shipped all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just like, in terms of like mental processes and mental mobility, it's like we're very sort of like devolved in a way, even though like historically there's been a lot of like spiritual insights and also Eastern traditions, yoga, meditation, things like that. So there is a lot of like history to it. But like if contemporary Western mind is very like sick in a way, like, like a lot of people are depressed, a lot of people have anxieties. It's like almost everybody affected, and so the question is like, okay, what kind of world do we want to build? I mean, I do fully support, all this abundance by AI and like exploring the stars and Mars, all these kind of things. Like, I have nothing against that. I actually support that. And I think it's great because it opens sort of like a new vista for what's possible and like striving to build new things. But I do think like, there's like different types of freedom, and one freedom is like internal, or, when you say internal, people think it's not real or it's not important, but it's this type of freedom from the mind. Practical thing is like, okay, when you fall asleep, if you have too many thoughts, you can't really fall asleep, and then you don't have a good sleep, and then you don't have a good day if you don't really sleep well. And then we've internalized so much of like, okay, now you need to drink coffee and perform and like, be cutthroat and like don't sort of like, so I guess like it's like also a cultural change, that sort of like that entails that type of freedom. But yeah, just specifically like, okay, how can we build tools? How can we build technology to give people more mental mobility, actually to help yourself, to heal yourself? And dreams is a good example. Meditation is another example. So I think just this is like a real valid frontier, the mind. And the brain is very unexplored, and the mind is even larger than the brain in terms of its scope and possibilities. And reality itself is very unexplored. Consciousness is very unexplored. And so it's just like makes sense that we spend some resources to like develop things to help people help themselves. So they have more, it's kind of like Bitcoin for the mind, because otherwise all this abundance and all this money, and people are still unhappy, and people are still like then chasing more. And that's part of the problem of the illusion of time. People are just constantly chasing the past or the future, in some ways, trapped, and like then not really being in the present. But then, if you talk about the present, then you sound like a yogi, and people don't really take you seriously. But
yeah, somehow still. When you talk about dreams and that new frontier, do you speak about my wishes or the things I see when I sleep or during my meditations?
Your question is if I refer to dreams as a wish? Well, actually, no. I think that's just like how Western world is referring to dreams. People like think a dream, like people say, oh, it's just a dream. It's just like a wish you have, but that's not feasible. It's not possible. And almost like the cynical interpretation of that is kind of like shows the lack of optimism in the Western world. Because it's like, what do you mean it's just a dream? Everything is a dream. Like, you know, everything starts with a dream. A dream is the foundation of reality. No dreams, no reality, no life, nothing. And so I think it goes so deep, I didn't even realize. Yeah. Anyway, so I do think, like, yeah, that's why I think it's important to, you know, be actually, there's like this saying of like, you know, everyone wants to change the world, but you should just change yourself first, at least change yourself first. And there's so much like emphasis on changing the world, and then everyone wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change themselves. And I do think it can't just be about, in the 21st century, can't just be about more stuff, more things. Like, obviously we want that, but not just like, it can be at the exclusion of like, then completely forgetting. And like, obviously there's a lot of people like, you know, people getting into yoga, meditation. So a lot of people doing this, but it's still like an esoteric sort of like not mainstream thing. And that's why I'm hoping, I mean, that's how I got into, like, I guess I got excited about this because I thought, okay, wow, lucid dreaming is a real scientific concept, and it's kind of like a virtual reality psychedelic that you can induce in yourself, and that's very powerful. And like, yeah, how can we make this real? And so as we see now, you know, with the advances in generative AI and things like that, it's all feasible with neural interfaces. I mean, the metaverse is also going to come into existence, like the virtual worlds. But I do think like people need to also figure out, okay, how can you face reality, not just like escape and be in this dream world. And the idea is like, how can you face your neurotic behavior or your limitations, your psychological barriers, like I said, fears, anxieties, there's so many things. And the pharma industry doesn't really have any solution because people are just getting, you know, what do people take? They take some pill and then temporarily they feel better, but it doesn't really solve the problem.
No, and antidepressants.
And they're making a lot of money as an industry. And like, it's the same thing with therapy. I think therapy can also be very helpful, but then you have the case of like people talking to the therapist for years on end, and like it's just like talking and nothing gets done, nothing changes, you know. So the idea is to like affect profound change within yourself. And also I do think like, what kind of world are you building if you're like mentally sick, which nobody will like, you know, acknowledge anyway. And in some ways, you know, it's a sort of a balance, you know, you can't wait for the perfect healthy moment to keep going. But I do think the world would benefit a lot from there being, just like how on Amazon, there's like, you know, different types of things you can buy. Like if you want to build a house, you know, there's all these kinds of tools, Home Depot or other stores. But when you have like problems with your mind, it's like, because it's invisible, it's an inward, people don't even realize it's hard to even acknowledge, and then to pinpoint exactly what's the problem. But it does basically create all these problems, you know, because then from the mind, a lot of diseases arise, you know, in your body. And so better like try to prevent that, you know. But because the culture is kind of fragile and woke, you know, you can't say something, you can't criticize, you have to be careful what you say, and then it's hard to like give people critical feedback or like be even honest with yourself. So some of it requires also cultural shifts, but it's a real frontier, and it's very important, I think. And you know, I didn't realize it would be such a nightmare, but I'm also like living through it as a psychonaut or astronaut type of person, and it's just difficult stuff, you know. I mean, yeah.
What is the most difficult of it? Like, what are you struggling with? What are the challenges you're going through right now?
Well, in terms of having like products or, you know, some momentum from tangible things that exist in the real world. I guess the challenge is that something like this is like extraordinary wild and very far out, especially how I envisioned that. And then because of all the bureaucracy, of all the problems that exist in the world that prohibit people from doing things, because of unnecessary regulations of things you're not allowed to do, especially in the US. You can't use you were not able to use crypto as fundraising legally. It was like very hostile environment. And then having sort of like the principles of like, okay, how can you create open type of like protocols? Yeah. And then, generally speaking, with anything, usually there's a science and technology, and then people build businesses around that, and usually it's like difficult as an individual, as a startup, to build like a movement, build a new industry, build a new market. I mean, Elon Musk is able to do this, but he was able to do this after decades of like, creating different types of startups and being very successful in executing that. And so I think like I just need to figure out, okay, how can I be able to like create this in a tangible way? And I think it's kind of like hard because there's very little, there's no NASA equivalent for the mind. It's like people don't think it's valuable, generally speaking. People like laugh at the idea of dreams. People don't like to sleep generally, especially in America. It's easier to take a pill than to talk about your problems, and people don't realize that all the diseases and problems they have, they originate from the mind to a large extent. I mean, surely there's like a lot of people like interested in this, right? So that's good. But I'm just like saying across the board, mainstream, it's still very esoteric. But that's also encouraging in a way, because that means it's like a new ocean and it's like a new world, and there's a lot of possibilities, and it doesn't, I think it's like, perhaps when I started, the idea was like, okay, this very sci-fi, sort of like I was living in Silicon Valley then, and okay, how can you use neural interfaces to build this kind of like matrix-like world? But dreams are sort of very ancient technology, and the idea of like us thinking that we're more advanced now is not necessarily true. In some ways, we've also like, we think we know everything, but we don't know a lot of things, and at least I think back a couple hundred years ago, people were more in awe of reality and they believed more in magic and things like that. And now people think that they know everything, that, they're just like dismissing some things outright. And so I think it is difficult, obviously to like think that, we could have a reality that is just like the waking state reality that we have in the dream state. But since everyone is sleeping and it's a scientific concept, it's possible. So that's kind of wild to think about, that basically in the future, people will just do whatever they're doing right now, from like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. They can also do at night. But I do think, my emphasis is like, okay, this could be also the greatest entertainment. Could be like a new type of Hollywood. But I do think it's also important that we sort of use a dream to face reality in a way where we can like heal ourselves and be free. And that makes it also hard, because then it's like easier to sell dopamine hits or sugar, right?
Well, depends. It depends on what one is seeking, right? And what state of consciousness one is at. So it really depends on the initial audience and initial group of people that are setting up the network and so on. Yeah. So what is your big vision with the network? Why dreams are such a big part of it? How you imagine it coming together?
Well, I do think like there's something magical about dreams, and it is a real thing, and it's kind of like a hidden secret in nature, and it's very contrarian, and it has a lot of value, and it can help you like redefine yourself, gain a new perception, get a new perspective, and I think that's incredibly powerful. And so it's kind of like insane that nobody's like, there's a few people working on it, but it's very like, it's very out there, like off the map. Like, yeah, it's not really seen as anything valuable. So I think the idea is to like then create like dreams into this type of medium, just like music or film is like, it's the type of, medium that exists. I mean, video games didn't always exist. kind of amazing to think that we can now play video games. I mean, we can play video games now, and they have been improving on an exponential curve. It seems. I mean, they look more and more just like reality. So that's kind of amazing. So dreams can also be, and the cool thing about dreams is it's even more. It's more than music. Well, I don't want to say more, but it is like something that exists in nature. So it's like it's even more real than real. Like it's even more real than something we create. Although I guess that gets philosophical. The point is like dreams exist in nature because we all sleep every day, and so it's just a question of like how can we make some scientific breakthroughs from which we can then build technology, and then different people can build different startups and businesses, so it can be a real thing. And like I can't imagine like maybe other than going to Mars, this is like insanely amazing, like to think that this is possible and feasible, but it's like insanely difficult to do this because it's not just building a startup and then people look at you like, they think I'm like the visionary or whatever but the idea is it's just like I sort of pursued my curiosity and I chased the curiosity and out of a sense of adventure and the experiences I had, I felt like this is like feasible, it's possible, but I didn't realize how difficult it would be. Yeah, and now I'm like so deep in the rabbit hole. Yeah, I mean,
what do you need the most at this time to make steps further into developing this network? What are you lacking in terms of resources?
Well, it's more like I need to figure out specific steps that I can execute so then something can exist in reality with the technology that's currently feasible. And so then there's like a flywheel of like more people and more resources and capital. And this is like very like, at this point, religious, spiritual type of journey. Yeah, so it's very hard in many, many ways. And yeah, so then I think like that's like what needs to happen is like something that exists in real life, and there's more momentum and more actual like something that people can use because that's what people trust when there's a proof of concept and when there's something they can use. And I think like that's what's like missing is that I was not able to do that yet. Perhaps, because it was quite the vision. And then because, well, you can always say there's certain environment, like, okay, I couldn't do this. I couldn't raise money this way or that way. But at the end of the day, people look at you in terms of like, what kind of results can you deliver? And so I think it's just like, I mean, I can analyze endlessly. The truth is like, if I like I need to appreciate that I'm like very deep into this because I discount myself very heavily every day because I don't see anything existing or growing, and then I feel like it's all going nowhere. But like I don't think like there's many people in the world that are so like, I mean, I think there's a few people who are like heavily focused on a specific question or topic, but generally not many. And then in regards to like dreams, it's like but also like you want to create this in a way where normal people or like ordinary people or like everyone, like in terms of like not just like people in the tech groups or crypto people, like there's not supposed to be a cult or a community. The idea is to like, okay, how can this be downloaded now into the present and like something that people can play just like video games, and like they don't need to understand all this kind of like esoteric spiritual stuff, and it's just like people have busy lives and stressful lives, and it's just like something simple that's feasible. Yeah, and I think that's been very difficult so far, but I do think like if I keep going, I can figure this out. It's just very difficult when you like work on something for so long and then it's not going anywhere,
Well, you were working on the blockchain technology as well. Why did you leave that space specifically?
Well, that's another whole story. I don't know if you want to go into that.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, that's a whole nother story.
But if you want to share a little bit of why did you decide to leave that space so that you could pursue what you're working on now?
Well, I was kind of, I mean, part of it is like, it is the past now, and I survived the Hunger Games. You don't want to go back into the Hunger Games, but I do learn a lot from it, and I do think there's like obviously valuable things from the blockchain world. You know, there were some things that happened that really uplifted my life in a very negative way. With like, you know, it's kind of ironic because, you know, the idea of like crypto is like it's immutable to truth in a way, and like I had a lot of like people lie and cheat and break trust and like make promises that they didn't honor, and on different levels from individual to company to state level. You know, part of the things, I guess, you know, it was also some mistakes that I made and I didn't know better at the time. And and then I suppose like it was just like more speaking to my heart. And I did like this idea that, you know, you could take an idea and run with it and build a new market. That's a very like thing that I've sort of like realized when, you know, when I sort of like saw like Ethereum developers like gather at Stanford and like, you know, work on something like that I didn't understand at the beginning. And then it came into reality, and sort of like now it's like changing the world of finance and other industries. And so I think that's very powerful, a notion. But most people in crypto are just mostly like sort of anchored in that world, and it's already quite like, you know, contrary to be working crypto, at least like, you know, many years ago. And so then the idea of like using all these crypto principles to like then build a new industry with neural interfaces. I mean, in 2017, neural interfaces was not like, you know, now people are warming up to the idea because Elon Musk is making progress on Neuralink, but it's still like very sort of like, back then it wasn't like that. And so I suppose like, that's also why I think, because of like my history, that's why I thought deeply about, you know, if dreams come into existence, it can't just be by corporations and then, you know, all this advertising in dreams and all this kind of dystopian stuff that exists. But like I said, you know, I sort of like wrote this white paper in 21, and the idea was to raise money and then have like a research network, and then figure out some scientific breakthroughs. From that, you can then build products. But it wasn't legally possible. I mean, you could go to some like offshore entities. Anyway, also the appetite, I guess, wasn't there for such an esoteric topic. You know, most people then invest in like layer ones and different like kind of like, you know, DeFi related stuff. And then because I was in exile, I was like quite disconnected in some ways from all of these different things, and going through my own like things. Yeah, it's like, I don't know, I can talk about this for a long time. This is like a long story.
How did you get from that space into the network state space? How did you find out about it, and how did you end up at that conference? Why were you interested in that?
Well, I mean, the network state concept is a very crypto-related concept, right? Balaji, who created the movement, it has been in crypto. You know, he worked at Coinbase, so I've been, you know, part of the different crypto communities for a long time. And I suppose I have been living in some sense, you know, in a different type of state. Part of it is like mentally and through like exploring the mind, but also having lived in exile and not being able to have a home really anywhere in the world. And still like investing everything into America. But then, you know, then I was living like, you know, not maybe like in the network state in the political sense, but I was living in type of like some type of new state. And so I thought, I mean, I didn't like, obviously, you know, the startup is called Network, you know, network state. So, you know, kind of cool that he's like using that name. Also, my professor, he wrote a book about the hierarchies and networks, you know. So, I mean, there's a lot of people prior to Balaji who like been writing about this. So this is not like a new thing. So this is now like, in some sense, like the next logical conclusion from all these different trends and things that are happening. Yeah, and I thought, I guess, the value of crypto is the kind of people you meet, different interests, and yeah. So I was in Europe at the time, so I went to the one in Amsterdam. They invited me, so
nice. Well, tell me, this is 2034. This is 10 years ahead type of question. You were able to build the blueprints of the network. What are you proud of? What you were able to establish, and what are you working on now, 10 years ahead?
Well, I don't know if I'm thinking about this yet. I'm still my journey has been facing death in a real way for the past 7 years, and it's been pretty hardcore. In some ways, when I say the Hunger Games, I say it jokingly, but then even Mark Andreessen said it recently, the Hunger Games exist in America. Oh, wow. So in some extent, to a large extent, yeah, it has been very violent and disruptive and volatile. I suppose it's sort of this idea that this exists as a real thing, that people just like crypto 10 years ago, and then now there's way more in sort of the mainstream consciousness, and there's a forcing function of different technologies being built. It's still obviously a struggle against the state because it's very political, but it's just way more accepted, and more people are working on it. It's a real thing. And so I think for me, the past 7 years, so many people they don't laugh at you directly, or it's not but it's definitely in some ways it's quite insane to be working on, and then all in I'm it's not I was doing this as a side project or something like this. I was really doing this primarily. I didn't have a job, or I didn't have VC funding this. I didn't get any. I didn't have a type of ICO for the network yet, out of fear, because America was so hostile against this whole thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, so if in 10 years in 10 years the world will look so different just because of AI and neural interfaces. Yeah. So these days, I just think more in terms of okay, how can it, because I think generally when I got into this, it was just more out of the sort of the curiosity of my heart, and it wasn't because, oh, I can make a lot of money of this, or this is a great way to change the world or whatever. It was just having experienced different mental states through different avenues. It was just for me revolutionary to think that dreams could become a new medium and become reality, just how the waking state is reality. And it's an enormous frontier in so many ways. And if that can become reality, and if there's more people working on this, and if you can make money with this, so people can actually risk their career to be working on this, just how the PC, personal computer revolution, and the internet, it was first a thought, and then, more people thought about it, and then there was some plan, and people implemented it and executed on it, and now it's its own thing. So this is this will go yeah, even movies or games have still so much potential of being redefined and new possibilities. So dreams have not even started yet. So if just how Elon is trying to go to Mars and accelerate that and open the window and make it possible, and that's why he lives for that, at least I would think largely, but at least a fair amount. So it's becoming its own reality that we're having a self-sustaining city on Mars, and I do think something like this for dreams, in terms of that you're able every day to explore your dreams and nightmares, because that comes in your fears and your anxieties, and it's a normal thing. Just how people open the screen or their phone, people open themselves up to their own dreams.
I like it.
Yeah, and so with neural interfaces and artificial intelligence, it will be quite insane in a way, because we will have Westworld type of worlds. Yeah, I guess thinking from 2034, I'd be curious to think about how did I do it? Because right now it seems like so impossible. Because after working so many years on this and so many failures and losses and like defeats, and I keep going, but like it feels like less likely every day that this will ever be anything. But I can't think like that, otherwise, like then I might as well, like I need to think more optimistic and more like, okay, we can do this. And I can find a way and execute, and I can deliver a way. And not like it needs to be my way. It's more like just more like, okay, how can I get this into reality, and then other people can join. I think where it's also becoming like a reality for myself, where like other people are there, and
ultimately it is about other people understanding what you're communicating and being able to hear and be inspired by the visions and dreams that you have, because they also share those dreams and visions in their own way.
So, yeah, but in the market, you need to also deliver some type of like tangible product, and then you communicate that way.
That product comes in once people, the right people are gathered that believe in the same idea, right? That see the same vision that you have. And the product is going to be established once we know what we need to establish basically for ourselves, so we can use that product ourselves. Ultimately, that's the first step, I think.
Yeah, part of it is also like sort of having arrived from the mountain, so to speak, back into reality, and just like focusing on something that's like simple, feasible. Sometimes like the vision, like I guess generally speaking, a vision is great, but like the vision enough, like it's not enough, just to have a vision, or like it's just how it's not enough to have an idea. Like it's this notion of like, it gets you started, it gives you a direction, but then ultimately you need to like experiment and figure out, okay, like how can this be installed into reality, into something that I can use, that other people can use. And I think because it's like, that's difficult, even if you're doing like, let's say a generative AI project, or like, some AI agent project, that's even difficult then, like even you need to do it then. You basically pick an idea within an established trend, and then you need to like basically figure this out, right? So with something like this, it may be even harder, but again, the market judges you by the results that you can deliver, and not like the idea or the vision or your thoughts. And yeah, I mean, part of crypto is also like, it's a lot of like, what's the actual outcome? How are people using this every single day? Like normal people, like it's a lot of like, obviously big ideas and, very like theoretical things, but like what's actually like, like someone created a chair once, kind of amazing, and we're still using it. And then people and so obviously this is like very advanced stuff. So it can't just be like perpetually like this thing like in crypto where it's just like getting people and then they're building this community and then there's no product around it, like I think it's fine like for the people within crypto, but if you actually care about like the rest of the world, which is the vast majority, like you need to be more like Elon, building more useful things like products, something tangible, experiment, and it's like, I guess with something like this, because it's so internal, it's not and then you don't have like this like whole culture or but anyway, it is what it is. I can endlessly say about where we are at the moment and how like other industries have more support or more resource or more people, more money, but that doesn't matter. Like the reality is it is a scientific thing. It's not insane. It's not insane. I'm not insane, and like this is feasible, and this is important, because even though people think dreams is this wish fulfilling machine, it's essentially something that can also help you to heal yourself, to have more mental mobility, which, given the mental health crisis, is a very valid thing to be working on, that we need a new paradigm for something like that. And like within that, it must be possible. And like, we can leverage AI, we can leverage crypto and all these different things, but it's its own thing. Like this is not AI, this is not crypto, it's a mind, and it's a new frontier. And so that's what it is.